I mean, the layers of
Yeah.
life and story, it's just incredible. Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob. As always, I am here with Jackson, and we are back to have another great conversation about another great play, a playwright that we have discussed before, all the way back in season 9, one of my favorite great realist family dramas, The Wash. And now we are coming to another evocative, provocative, really moving, poetic, lyrical play, Ballad of Yachiyo by Philip Kan Gotanda.
Yeah, excited for the conversation today. This play like does so many cool things with theater, but also blending in some, almost like cinematic elements, lots
Yeah.
of great like pulling in different locations and moving fluidly between them, telling this like really evocative story. So yeah, I'm excited for the conversation today and excited for the chance to kind of talk about these characters and also the art of theater that's woven into this play.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little more about this in the context section, but the place that this play came from as a kind of unknown relative that the playwright had learned the name of late in life and didn't know much about their story, and the process of trying to uncover that and then needing to invent a kind of alternate history. All that is just really fascinating to me. When we talked about The Wash all the way back 7 seasons ago now, we talked about some of the characters and the situations in that play coming out of the life of people that Philip Kan Gotanda knows or knew. And so I think that playwrights, like all artists, they're observers, right? And so sometimes we think of like, well, if autobiographical or biographical elements appear in a play, it's like unique. But I suspect that a lot more plays have these elements of the things that playwrights observe in the people around them, because that's really what it is to be an artist, right? That you
Yeah.
see, you hear stories, you experience stories, and then that material becomes, in some way, sometimes more explicitly and accurately, sometimes much more abstractly, it works its way into the art.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I'm excited for your context section because there's like 3 different rivers of kind of experience that Philip Kan Gotanda weaves into this play from his experience, but his family background as well. So it's yeah, and it's really cool to see how that kind of like braid forms as a result of those lived experiences. I'm excited for the conversation today. Excited to jump into the conversation. Before we do, want to say thank you to all the patrons over on patreon.com/noscriptpodcast for being patrons of the show. Y'all rocketh. Thanks for being patrons all these years as we enter season 16 of No Script the podcast. If you're looking for a way to help out the show or just for another way to be involved in the No Script community, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast is a great way to do that. You can find a number of different tiers of patronship over there. The lowest one is just $1. That's $12 over the course of the year. And you get access to all sorts of things over there. You got patron-only posts, sometimes advance notice of scripts that we are doing, as well as various other tiers of patronship that you can check out over there. But the lowest one is just $1. Thanks to all the patrons who have already made the decision to support the show. And we will see you at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast.
And now back to the script.
Here we go.
So, Ballad of Yachiyo, as I sort of alluded to in our introductory conversation there, how it came to be, and this is kind of my understanding of the story. I've read and listened to several interviews with Gotanda about the process, and then there's actually a foreword in the script with a little more of the story kind of laid out, is that sometime in his adulthood, Gotanda heard his father mention the name of a sister that he had back in the sort of their previous life before Gotanda was born. Even he had never met this sister, Yachiyo. So of course you see the name in the title. And nobody wanted to talk about this sister. Nobody wanted to tell the story. There was clearly a hurt there, something that needed to be unburied. And so this is where I'll just pause the conversation to say that this conversation is going to be about, in some ways, it's part of the plot and also the real life story that Gotanda is drawing from. We're going to have a conversation about suicide, at least in some way. And if that is not a conversation that you want to be a part of today, that's, of course, totally fine. We've got lots of fabulous conversations that have nothing to do with such dark subjects. So check out a different conversation or come back to this conversation on a better day or not at all. That's totally fine. You do what you need to do to take care of yourself, but that will be part of the conversation material today. So, what Gotanda uncovers is that this aunt, his father's sister, committed suicide back in the day by ingesting ant poison. And Gotanda could not really find out more of the story than that. In fact, at some point, he goes back to where his family was living at the time and looks for the grave because he's trying to dig up this material, becomes fascinated. He has this one photograph of Yachiyo. And tries to dig up more and is really unable to find it. And so he tells the story of wanting to write this play about his aunt that he never knew for a long time, for 6-7 years. He sort of sits on it. And he talks about not being able to find Yachiyo's voice. Like that is the thing that is missing in his ability to construct this story. And then his wife has to go to the hospital for some sort of short stretch of time. And he's there in the hospital with her during recovery. And while he's sitting in the hospital at his wife's bedside, he pulls out his laptop and writes this play. It comes out of him in this kind of heightened situation, this situation where, you know, there's a lot of hurry up and wait in hospitals. There's a lot of caretaking. There's a lot of nerves and anxiety in hospitals. In this situation, out of that comes this play. And so he says, this is a quote from the foreword, it's not the true story, again, because he couldn't really ever hunt up the details of the full true story. So he says, it's not the true story, or even a story drawn from complete factual interpretation. It's just the story that came out by accident at a moment of non-expectation, a nephew's made-up tale to complete something incomplete in his own family's story. I mean, that is, even just that short paragraph gives you a sense of the degree of writer that Gotanda is. That's incredibly strong writing. But also a fascinating idea that creating an alternate history for what might have happened, and not even one that he purports to be even an idea about what might have happened, but a story about, almost a story about the story of not knowing, that completes this thing that's missing, that he feels is hidden and buried in his family. Just a fascinating family social location for this play to come out of. Ballad of Yachiyo premieres at Berkeley Rep in 1995 in a co-production with South Coast Rep, and it ends up playing in both places. To fairly positive reviews overall. It's got a great combination of period cultural storytelling that tells a tale about a particular group of people in a particular place that people latch onto, but it also has these heightened, stylized, ritualistic elements. We'll talk about those, I'm sure. The puppetry, the tea ceremonies, the making of the teacups that occupies so much of the play. It goes on. We haven't mentioned this group in, I think, quite a while on the podcast, but it's time again to draw everyone's attention to the Los Angeles Theater Works, LATW, who does the incredible work of recording live audio recordings of actors. I guess they're readings, but they're also performances of plays. Plays are a spoken medium, a doing medium. So reading them, as we discover on this podcast a lot, there's some lack lack in that. And so LATW tries to, I mean, it's not visual in any way, but fills the gap a little bit by adding actors and interpretive choices. The recordings on LATW are fabulous. They have really high quality actors and many celebrity actors at various times throughout their history. We're not in partnership with them or anything. We're funded by LATW, but we love to give them a shout out and encourage you to go check out their great library, but especially for this conversation, the Ballad of Yachiyo recording that you have access to right now. You can go listen to it. It was recorded in 1996 in front of a live audience in Santa Monica. Goes on to play at Seattle Rep in 97. It has a great run at the Public Theater in 97. In 2000, it ends up playing in London at the Gate Theater in a co-production with the National Theater, to pretty high praise from the critical body over there. 2002, Tsunami Theater in DC, and 2003, the Tooth and Nil Theater Company in New York City.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, you've got kind of the spread of those plays there. I highly recommend the LATW production. It was a great listen, great way to engage the play. So yeah, there's going to be jumping into these synopsis today, or the summary today. Just wanted to note the themes that have already been talked about. We're also going to be talking about kind of the complication of an affair, an illicit affair, and the kind of feelings of a young woman, a girl, 16, 17 years old, that as she kind of develops feelings for an older man. So again, just another content warning for today. That's not something that you want to engage in. Totally fair. Lots of other shows that you could listen to today. We're going to be engaging that topic today. We're also going to be engaging a topic, a cultural play. This is a play written from the perspective of Japanese immigrants to Hawaii. And so it's worth it to acknowledge as we start this conversation that Jacob and I have a particular perspective, and we're going to link other resources below to broaden the perspective and include more voices into this conversation, even as we acknowledge that we're going to be observing it and talking about it today. So that said, those are the things that I'll chat about up front. This play takes place, as I kind of already mentioned, in Hawaii, and it centers on the life of Yachiyo. Now, Yachiyo is a young girl, 16 years old at the beginning of the play for sure, somewhere around 16 to 17 years old. By the end of the play, and her family is kind of in a tough moment. Her dad has gotten hurt on the plantations, and is struggling to work, and so she has 4 brothers and sisters, and so they have the need to try to figure out a different situation for Yachiyo. Also, her mom is a little bit worried about her finding an eligible husband or someone well off in the world. She's has a boyfriend, Willie, who works on the plantations as well, who her mom is not really a fan of, and so she decides to kind of tap some resources that she has. She knows that Yachiyo's father, reportedly, at least there's some doubt cast on like the truth of this story, but reportedly saved the life of kind of a wealthy merchant at one point who immigrated to Hawaii as well. And so his daughter is still alive, and so she connects with this family, with his daughter, who is Okusan Takamura, who is married to Hiro Takamura, and connects Yachiyo to them and asks if they would be willing to take her in and kind of teach her both some manners, but also like some of the kind of traditional ceremonies of Japanese culture, in the hopes that she can find a more eligible husband and elevate her station in life. A brief note on the Takamuras as well. So you have Okusan and Hiro Takamura, and as I already mentioned, Okusan is the daughter of kind of a pretty wealthy merchant, someone who had a good amount of money. Hiro Takamura is the son of a artisan potter, who pretty well to do in Japan, but kind of as a result of his partying and making poor money decisions, fell out of grace with his father, and was kind of felt the push to immigrate and move away from his father into the situation he is now.
Yeah, I just think it is a fascinating and really moving character decision. This guy who's the son of a famous artist, or the kid of a famous artist, who is trying to do that same art, There are, I'm sure, many
Yeah.
plays and books and such about that general topic, but at this moment in time, none that I can really put my finger on, and I find that to be a really interesting, like, internal conflict. Your parent was apparently the best at this, and now you're trying to do it, and the feelings of inadequacy, of not having the artistic genius. Like, we think about genius sometimes as like genetic in some way, right? Like, if your parents are brilliant artists, you're going to
Sure.
be a
Yeah.
brilliant artist. And this heroes, like, I didn't inherit the art genius gene from my parent. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the kind of struggles with that as he tries to do art in a new place with new things without the support that was kind of built around the artisan culture of making pottery within Japan. He's trying to like make a kiln from scratch, and fire pottery with different clay than he's used to using.
Yeah, the
So
clay is really interesting to me too. I learn a lot when I read plays in general. This play I've read because I'm using it for some dissertation stuff. So I've been working with it for a while, and there's a lot in there. The idea that the clay is composed of different things in different ratios than it is in Japan, and that is part of his struggle, is the difference in the clay, the difference in the water, the difference in the material that fires the kilns. I mean, all that is just fascinating to me. I mean, I'm
yeah,
always interested in stories of artists, and this really is one. And so it's just, I don't know, I'm just jazzed by that. That's fascinating.
for
I've never
sure.
thought.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? I'm not a sculptor. Clay's clay to me, but it's
Right.
different clay. That matters.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I'm excited to chat more about the pottery aspect of it and the tying in of the kind of physical art into the visual art as well. So that's kind of the given circumstances of the play. Into those given circumstances, Yachiyo decides to go and live with the Takamuras, and kind of learn. The intent is to learn from Okusan, but also when she arrives, it's discovered that she is expected to help Hiro in the kind of pottery area in the studio, we'll call it. And so she kind of sets to work helping him make his like kind of first batch of pottery with a new kiln here that he's trying to get put together. As a result of this, she kind of works in close proximity with both Okusan and Hiro. With Okusan, she's learning tea ceremonies, she's learning manners, and for a while it seems like she's there to kind of be a companion to Okusan. However, what also develops is, as she works kind of closely with Hiro, is this kind of interest and fascination both with pottery, but also as she kind of struggles with feelings that she's developing for Hiro. Now, Hiro is kind of known even around the town as being someone who is unfaithful in his marriage. He at one point says that he and Okusan kind of have this agreement that even as a result of his kind of marrying into her family, he sort of named at the beginning that he's not planning to be very faithful, and as long as he doesn't bring any dishonor to her, he'll keep it on the down low, etc. But they have this sort of like tenuous agreement around that. And that is something that Yachiyo eventually finds out, and there's some tension around that. She's asked to kind of go get him from a brothel at one point, so that he times the kind of the jars that he's making correctly. And so she's kind of like pulled into this world where he is often with much younger women, and having these affairs with much younger women. And they eventually kind of she begins to state some feelings for him. He also is kind of like throughout their relationship has been kind of this, somewhat abrasive instructor to her, but eventually their relationship turns into kind of spoken feelings and eventually intimacy as well. And that sort of like is all paired along this journey of them making pottery together for the first time in this studio. Now, the kind of to briefly sum up the drama of the play, so we can get into the conversation around it. After they have kind of had feelings for each other, they've slept together, they're kind of working on this pottery side by side. There's a moment eventually where Okusan kind of brings out into the open this relationship between them and states it out into the open. And there's some tension between the three of them as they engage this, but also as they engage the threat that is whether this pottery is going to come out of the kiln correctly or not. Because if it doesn't, it's kind of ruinous for everyone involved. And so there's some fear and trepidation around that. Eventually, Okusan just fires the kiln, kind of without permission from anyone. She goes and kind of starts the kiln and starts the batch of pottery going. There's some lovely symbology in here as well that I hope we get into later on around like there's a bird's nest in the kiln that's been there the whole time that they've kind of been caretaking, saying that they're going to take it out before they fire the kiln. Okusan goes out and fires the kiln without even taking the bird out of the kiln. Beautiful imagery there. Hopefully we get to that later on in the conversation. Along this same time, though, Yachiyo realizes that she is pregnant. And kind of confesses that to Hiro, lets him know, suggests that they run away together, and Hiro says, I'm not going to do that. I can't run away. I will not run away. Basically just says, figure it out, essentially. I can't leave with you. So she leaves, kind of in this dramatic moment of the firing of the kiln. She leaves and heads back to her family. Tries to connect again with Willie. Willie says that he'll marry her, but it's clear that he has no none of the same feelings that Yachiyo has kind of felt recently. And so she kind of trying to go home, realizes that she has this perceived shame on her family that she is living with, and decides to kind of go out into the waves and drown herself. And then kind of end of the play is this long monologue of her describing that journey into the waters of the ocean, and the kind of fallout, the brief fallout that we kind of get the sense that her dad wakes up in the middle of the night and knows that she is gone in some way, kind of in a surrealist dream experience. That's the plot of the play. There's so much beautiful symbolism woven through it that it's almost feels rude to synopsize it in this way. Yeah. So I'm excited for the conversation around it, because one of the things that Gotanda says in his foreword is this play is about a tone more so than a just the plot itself. The plot itself is compelling, but the tone of this play is achieved by so many beautiful things, so much foreshadowing and weaving together of art and beauty into a really painful, real story. And so I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, the final image of the play, just to put a button on that, after Yachiyo has drowned, Okusan and Hiro are pulling the pottery, which is Hiro makes these Japanese tea sets for a very particular ceremony around the tea that people from Japan did. And one of his frustrations is that the people in Hawaii don't seem to be as interested in that kind of elevated ritualistic pottery in general, but also that he makes a claim about sort of the broader parts of their lives that's reflective of. But so at the very end, after they finally fired the kiln, they finally put the pottery in, and Yachiyo has run away to go out into the ocean, all that. So they finally pull the pottery out, and it's like perfect and beautiful. It's this artistic achievement. It's a celebratory moment. It actually, their marriage has sort of been rekindled by what's gone on. Of course, that's juxtaposed with Yachiyo's suicide and her death by drowning. And so what happens is that Gotanda brings Yachiyo in as a sort of ghost character in this strange light. He gives her a monologue. He puts her on stage. And as Okusan is celebrating with Hiro about the incredible achievement of this tea set that they've made, she looks over at the ghost or the memory or the whatever of Yachiyo. And I think the image sort of suggests that this celebration, this victory for them, is going to be troubled by whether you call it a guilt or a memory or a whatever of what it cost Yachiyo in order for them to have this moment. And that really the contrast in those images is certainly some of what Gotanda is doing in the idea of like the sexual double standard, right? I mean, there's a fair number of subplots in this play that we often in our shorter conversations on this podcast, we don't have time to get to every subplot, but there's various subplots in this play that demonstrate that within this culture that they live in, there's huge shame around sex outside of marriage. And so getting pregnant outside of marriage brings a huge shame on your family, but really only for the women, right? And so there, another young woman in the play that we hear about actually does the thing that Gotanda learned about his aunt Yachiyo, which is take ant poison because she was pregnant and she didn't want to bring that shame on her family. It's unclear to me whether, as an audience member, you would know the story of Gotanda's aunt and know that as like, I mean, an Easter egg seems not the right tone for this, but that it's, you see that and you're like, oh, that's what happened. So now what's going to happen to Yachiyo? Because I thought that was how this was going to end for Yachiyo, but it actually is somebody else's story.
Yeah, the way this play utilizes foreshadowing is really awesome. And I sort of wonder about that too, because it's in almost all the resources around this play, or in all the forewords. Every interview Gotanda does kind of talks about his aunt and the specificity of kind of taking this story of taking rat poison. And so when it comes up in the play, you know, just a little bit of kind of reading I did before reading the play, it was there. The foreshadowing was there. It's like, oh, there it is. So it's kind of a lovely a bait and switch if you have that in your dramaturgy in your program or something like that, for that to be there, because there's also really tragic, but tragic, touching, really beautiful foreshadowing happening around water as well. And how the eventual end of the story of her walking into the ocean and swimming down into the ocean is foreshadowed 3 or 4 times in really evocative ways. So you have the two of them kind of floating together, and it's interesting to kind of wonder as the reader, wait, which one is being foreshadowed?
Yeah, no, I agree. And so in this final image, you have, I think, a portrait of one of the things that Gotanda is bringing attention to and asking questions about, this double standard where women carry shame around having sex outside of marriage, and men, in this case, like exampled by Hero, he has a huge artistic achievement. His career is actually going to go forward. His marriage is rekindled. He has a victory as a result of this affair. And so how is sex and shame around sex held differently across gender? And certainly you can see where that question might have come up in Gotanda's life as he learned this real life story about his aunt. And so that, you know, like that's one example of a sort of ghostly, very layered image that ends the play. But I got to talk about the beginning of this play, because it is one of the most wild, incredible beginnings to a play that I can imagine. What happens is, at least in the stage directions, and I mean, as a director, I would absolutely do this. It seems to be called for in the script. You project the picture, the real life picture of Gotanda's aunt, Yachiyo, the real Yachiyo. You project that picture. I assume it comes with the materials somehow, right? You project that large, and then the actor playing Yachiyo in the play steps in front of the projection so that photograph is projected onto her body. Yeah. That is wild, man. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that beginning to the play like so claims like really cool theatricality, really cool cinematic things, also claims this real value for the sort of like biographical nature of this story, the kind of like the living on of this story from the real world. Even as we engage a story that's kind of an amalgam of multiple stories that kind of come together to tell this one story. But yeah, I think that is so impactful at the beginning, and it sort of sets up most like so much magic or surrealism that suffuses the rest of the play.
Yeah, well, and I think that that idea of a world where storytelling and magic and a kind of heightened reality is part of it is important because the way the drowning is told at the end is
Yeah.
very representative and suggestive and evocative. And so you have to create a world where that feels akin to what else is going on. Otherwise, that major moment at the end of the play is going to feel out of place and strange. And so, one of the things Gotanda does so well is set up this world where storytelling, scenes flow together. There's a kind of non realism throughout. Even as, I just want to read, I have a couple of these as we talk, a quote from an interview with American Theater Magazine. The interviewer is asking Gotanda, the interviewer Nina Sigal is asking Yachiyo, Gotanda rather, the playwright, about Yachiyo's story. The interviewer says, Yachiyo's story is almost archetypical. A woman falls in love with an inaccessible man, gets pregnant, and commits suicide. Did you have any concerns about retelling that story? Okay, so that's the question. Gotanda answers in a way that I think it is relevant to our conversation here. He says, I was very concerned about romanticizing the death of a young woman, turning it into a beautiful story. But the important thing became telling the real tale, the violent and unpretty truth of a real person who killed herself. At the end of the play, I have an epitaph dedicated to the memory of Yachiyo Gotanda, 1902 to 1919, and Sharon added a photograph of her face. These two things are projected for the audience. I think that helps break the audience out of the mythology of the story. You're confronted with the reality of this woman's life and death. So there is this other juxtaposition. We're talking a lot about the way the layering of images is working in this play. So one of the things that's being layered and contrasted is the beauty and non-reality of the way the world of the story is constructed, and the very not beautiful, violent, messy, painful, very real presentation of the not presentation of, but fact of the story.
Yeah, the way that you're kind of made to remember that this is real and not just sort of like an imagining is interesting, especially given that so little is known of the real Yachiyo's story, and a lot of this story is an imagining, but it's like it claims the sort of faithful imagining, or perhaps even like reverent imagining of her life and the realities of what it must have been like as she tries to navigate this, and the complicating factors, right? Like this is that even amidst the beautifulness of this story, it's a story of pain, of leaving home because you don't have enough to eat, of trying to find ways to survive in a world where there's a lot of injustice going on. You talked briefly about like, you know, kind of subplots that influence the story. There's a whole subplot that we get in this story around her boyfriend Willie, and he's like, you know, trying to, you know, stand up and do activism work to try to get better wages for plantation workers. So there's a lot that this play is presenting in terms of like, this is the real world that this character is in, even while it uses some really beautiful imagery and art to tell that story.
Yeah, well, and the idea that you know, he says there in that quote that he's demythologizing,
Yeah.
right? So there is a mythic quality to the way the story is told, all of the ritual and some things that we'll talk about, I'm sure. But his drawing his attention back to, I guess, like even for conversations like this one, right? Like this is not just a haunting, beautiful story of a woman who falls in love with an inaccessible man. This really, or not this exactly, but like this kind of thing really happened to a real person. A real person. His aunt took ant poison. and now his family refuses to talk about it. Those are the pain of the fact that it really happened in some way. It's obviously a fictional story, but that it is based on this really, he talks about his family, right? This incomplete truth in his family's history, I think it's really, and again, I don't know what the audience, like, does every audience member go in and know who the person in this photograph is? How do you signpost that in the program, in the pre-show materials? I think all of that becomes a really interesting part of the play in some way.
Yeah.
What information do you give the audience about where the story came from as part of the story?
Yeah. Well, and it's wise that the epitaph, like the full version of what we know about this photograph, comes at the end. And the kind of so the first time we interact with this photograph, there's kind of this possibility that it's still, just narratively woven in. It's sort of setting the scene as like this, we've been in plenty of plays that are kind of telling true stories, but not like, factual stories or something like that, or like historical stories. This play sort of starts that way, but by the end, that it is tied to a real person who actually lived a significant part of this story.
Yeah, and maybe maybe if there's no pre-show or program material to draw your attention to that, the epitaph would be enough to make you at least curious to look it up or something.
Yeah.
To try to find it in that way. You mentioned, I think in our little introductory conversation, that the play is cinematic in some ways, has some like filmic stuff in it. Gotanda talks about, for American Theater Magazine, he says, at the time, I was working on a more filmic approach to my playwriting. Yachiyo was always intended to be a play, but I wanted to use some cinematic qualities. I knew from the beginning that it was a play with a lot of filmic elements like fades. So this, I think, is another interesting place where there's some layering going on, because this play has a lot of scenes and a lot of locations, a lot of short scenes that move back and forth between locations. That really is film language. That's harder for theater to do, and theater is better at other things than film, where you can just easily move back and forth between shots from different locations, different times, go back and forth, very easy fade between them, things like that. So he has this filmic stuff going on, even while there's also parts of this play that are absolutely and distinctly theatrical, like the puppets.
Yeah.
Okusan is, throughout the play, she's telling this story of her life, essentially. It's a narrativized, to draw in this word again, mythologized version of her life. She talks about a young woman and a man, not herself and Hiro. But she's telling this story of her marriage, of her life, and whenever she tells it, her and one of the other actors that plays one of the smaller roles bring to animation these puppets, and what they look like exactly, will be, you have to have a puppet designer for the play. So I don't know that there's a way for me to give you a great visual description, because I think it would differ depending on what you have going on. But there's a young woman puppet and a young man puppet and another young woman puppet that would represent Yachiyo, I suppose. And so throughout the play, they do the Okusan's story in little bits and starts, and it changes. The way she's telling it changes over the course of the play, as Yachiyo is, her story with Hiro is evolving, and Okusan's marriage to Hiro is kind of changing too. So you have these puppets that are, as I've read many of the reviews now, and they often are a feature of the review. This incredibly non-realistic, incredibly non-filmic feature, of ritual storytelling that is the use of puppetry and these beautiful displays of movement. Okusan, it's not just a storytelling element, it's something that Okusan describes, like in the content, in the narrative herself, that she has these dolls that she, in moments of loneliness or disconnection, will go and kind of play with, is maybe not the right words, but use to tell the story as a comforting thing. And then she ends up using it, first of all, as a connection point with Yachiyo, and then later as a sort of subtle way of saying, by the way, I know what's going on to Yachiyo. So
Yeah.
its role in their relationship changes, but you have these very non-filmic puppets, even in a play where Gotanda is like, one of the things I was doing as writing it was experimenting with film qualities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, right? Like, I think there's the stage directions in this play talk about a lot of those filmic moments a lot, and fades is probably the most succinct way to talk about them. But there's multiple types of fades. There's like fades from locations, fades lighting cues, fades into puppet shows. Like there's so much of this sort of like cross fade happening between the scenes, and a lot of that is accomplishable with pools of light. That's certainly called for often in this play, using light to transition us from place to place. Also, at least when the LA Theater Works version of the play, sound is used awesomely to transition us from place to place, whether through kind of staccato beating of claves to move from place to place, or by music that was composed for the piece as well. There's lots of ways that can be deployed within the theater to do those sorts of things, and I love it's very effective for me. That's my jam. But yeah, the puppetry is so really ties in, I think, some of what we were chatting about earlier a little bit. This sort of mythicality to it. This sort of almost saga connecting or big scale sort of narrative importance to this story that sort of ties in this sort of beautiful art form. Japanese theater uses puppetry to great effect in general, so it's certainly kind of giving connections and nods to that, but kind of weaves into a story that's a very human story, this beautiful artistic representation that evolves, that calls characters out, with Okusan kind of calling out the two of them for their affair via the puppets at one point, but also kind of allows us to engage some parts of the narrative that we don't see on stage with the human characters. The puppets kind of represent those actions as well. So it's a really intricate use of a very theatrical mode of storytelling.
And sometimes it represents Okusan's imagination and sometimes Yachiyo's. And as that changes, let me just give you a little example from the script. So this is sort of the moment when Yachiyo and Hiro have sex for the first time. The tension around their relationship and the expressions of affection for each other have sort of been growing. And so the stage direction, she, being Yachiyo, reaches out and places her hand on his cut hand. He's cut his hand. Yachiyo moves forward and kisses Hiro. Takamura is how it appears in the script, but his name's Hiro. He embraces her. The water gradually washes over and becomes blood red. A ripping sound score like wind over water. Fade to half light. So there's a fade, that filmic element. Fade to half light. As they embrace, Okusan is lit. Upstage from her, two dolls are lit. They mirror the embrace and movements of Yachiyo and Takamura. As Okusan watches the dolls, Yachiyo and Takamura fade to black. So Okusan is still watching them. Okusan is saying, they do not move to my wishes. I think she's speaking of the puppets there. I'm not manipulating them the way I want. Cannot make the world inside my head be the world out there. I will make it move to my wishes. Okusan dims to darkness, lights up on Yachiyo, watching the two dolls make love. So the dolls are representing the sex act that Takamura and Yachiyo are doing, both in the imagination of Okusan and like what she's picturing her husband doing with another woman. But then it shifts and Yachiyo is the one watching the dolls, and she's doing that as she's telling us the story of the first time that they're together like this. And so it becomes an imagination for Okusan and almost like a memory for Yachiyo.
Yeah, it kind of flows between the two characters' experiences, and thus it crosses the line into like sort of for us, the audience, as well, as much as it is, Okusan using the puppets to tell stories, or Yachiyo remembering via the puppets. It also becomes like our experience of those moments or imaginings or plot development. Because of the way it flows between the characters, and kind of represents what cannot be shown, which is how the characters imagine something is happening. So it's really cool.
Well, yeah, and this play. I mean, this is true probably of all theater to some degree, but this. In fact, let me speak more broadly first, and then I'll speak more. In prose or fiction writing, it's very easy to tell us what the characters are thinking, to make the inside of a character available to the audience. Because you can just say, he felt mad.
Right.
Better writers than me will say that, of course, much better. But you can just tell us what the character is feeling. Or you can tell us what the character was thinking. In that scene in prose, the author could have just written, and Okusan pictured them together on the bed and describe what she's picturing. In theater, we don't have access to the inside of people in the same way. You have to find ways to exteriorize that internal journey. And out of that, you get some of the theater's most incredible conventions that are, so beautiful. And so the puppets are, at least in that scene example, a way of exteriorizing two people's internal relationship with this event. And that is just so powerful, because a lot of this play relies on the interior journey of people. Like, as you said, I think when you were done with your summary, like summarizing just the actions of the play feels a little bit like doing it a disservice. There's a lot more going on inside of the actions than a more plot-based play.
Yeah, the symbols and objects they interact with in the play tell so much about what's going on inside of the characters. We've talked about the puppets for sure. I think I'd love to return just towards the end of this conversation to sort of where we started with pottery as the other like big object work that happens in this play. There's a tea set that is involved a lot, and the way that they engage with pottery together is really effective to generate that.
Yes, I can tie together our conversation about the dolls and the pottery
Yeah,
with another quote from this interview. So Gotanda is asked by the interviewer about the Japanese style puppetry that he involves in the play. And Gotanda answers, "I'm not Japanese, I'm Japanese American. And when I do use those elements or that aesthetic, I approach it more from that perspective. On the other hand, I have intellectually pursued Japanese aesthetics. My degree is in Japanese arts, and after I graduated, I spent a year in Mishiko, Japan, north of Tokyo, and worked, get this, as an apprentice to a potter."
Yeah.
So there is a lot of very carefully rendered pottery making in this play. How it works, the way the wheel works. Not just that, but like how you'd get a teacup out of a lump of clay on a pottery wheel. And it is described, so that helps. But the stage directions say it's both described and done. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a very... In the same way that the tea ceremony that Okusan teaches Yachiyo is represented in a way that requires some ritual attention to its actions, there is a fair amount of ritualized attention to the action of being a sculptor or a potter in this studio.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget which episode last season I said something similar to this, but it's always cool to see the various expertises of a playwright find their way into a play. and you pick it up in like little ways. Like plenty of playwrights could write a very good scene about pottery being a focal image without necessarily having been an apprentice potter. You could certainly access that. But little things in this play, like in dramatic moments or in high stakes moments, hero yelling out, "We have to find a way to close the valves on the 6th and 7th areas of the kiln." It's like, oh, that's really specific, and I totally believe that I'm watching, the chaos of firing a kiln for the first time. So it's super.
And think about the layering of real life and story here. So Gotanda is writing an alternate history for his aunt, who he doesn't know anything about. And as part of that, he interweaves an experience from his own life of being an apprentice to a potter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the layers of life and story, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and the way that the kind of creation of the pottery and also this existent tea set interrelate with each other is really evocative for the way that this, trio of characters is trying to interact with each other. Towards the start of the play, Okusan gives this tea set to Yachiyo that
I think it's the tea set Hiro's dad made, and
yeah.
he gave her as a wedding present.
So it's like kind of, and eventually Hiro notices this and kind of tells this story. And so it sort of represents this, like, again, all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, this sort of like artisan weight of his father that is in his life, that is floating through.
If you're going to put a very breakable tea set as a major prop set in the story, what do you think is going to happen
for
to
sure
that tea set in the moment of the play?
Yep,
the moment,
the moment in the dramatic moment. Of course, this tea set is shattered even as they move towards what is eventually the creation of a really beautiful tea set as a result of the firing of the kiln at that particular moment. So the way that follows through the play and weaves its way through the three of theirs interactions and relationship is so evocative, again, of showing what's going on inside of these characters with object work, with prop work, with specific calls to action.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for this conversation. There's so much more in this play that we have not talked about. We only marginally referenced the way that water imagery is shown throughout. We did not really talk much at all about Yachiyo's parents, who are fairly major characters, the way that letters are used across the course of this play. At one point, Okusan writes a letter to Yachiyo's not fiance, but boyfriend, I guess, but sends it to Yachiyo's parents, knowing that they will read it and pass it on as a way to shame Yachiyo and try to prevent. I mean, there's great, like, sort of cross human manipulation maybe, but negotiation, pursuit of what you want that goes on. There's great scene work. We talked a lot more about the layering of images and reality, but there's so much. Gotanda is such an amazing playwright. I can't recommend enough that you go back now and listen to our episode on The Wash if you haven't yet. The Wash is just a stellar play. All credit to Gotanda, who's a great screenwriter and professor too. Ballad of Yachiyo, just beautiful, haunting, very painful, but also this beauty construct that's at the core, and the questions about beauty that it asks.
Yeah, for sure. It was a gift to talk about it on the show today. Grateful for the chance to have the conversation, and grateful for the goodness that this conversation doesn't have to end here. We'd love to keep chatting about this play and include your voice into the conversation. So find us on the social medias at the username @NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on any of those sites. We'd love to keep talking about the Ballad of Yachiyo with you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, any of the other conversations in our short season so far, and our many long seasons in the past, just recommend us. Hey, let people know about the show. That's really how the show grows, is by word of mouth. Send us on to your family, your friends, anybody you know that likes conversations about theater or is interested in writing or themes, character work, deep explorations of drama literature, of performance theory. Send them our way. That's where they can find us. We are on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, the places where you get your podcasts. You can also just like our Facebook page and you'll see a link. It just appears right on there as part of the feed. Every Monday, you can just click play right from there. You don't even have to search anything. Just follow us and it'll get fed to you, and you can engage with us that way. Until next week, when we're back with another great conversation about another great script, I'm Jacob, here with Jackson. Thanks for joining us for No Script the Podcast.